Welcome to the first episode of Does It Animate, a series where I'll be reviewing action figures and judging them by how good they are for stop motion animation. The first figure I'm reviewing is the SH Figuarts legendary Super Saiyan Goku, an action figure from Bandai Tamashii Nations depicting the iconic version of Goku from his very first transformation against Frieza. This figure aims to capture one of the most important and genre-defining moments in all of manga and anime. With some detailed sculpt work and a diverse set of accessories, this is one of the figures that Bandai had to build mostly from the ground up, which is saying a lot because they love to reuse even their worst assets. Today, we're going to review this not only as an action figure for collectors, but as stop-motion enthusiasts will ask the question, does it animate? What does a figure need in order to be good for animation? Our categories will be look, versatility, movement, and durability. The look. This figure is immediately striking. It successfully captures the more buff and puffed up muscly look that Goku had at this point in the show, with an excellent sculpt and impressive musculature. I can't state enough how much I love the look of this figure with its proportions and anatomy. One of my favorite aspects here are the shoulders and upper arms. The shape and placement of the shoulders create an imposing silhouette, and the size and sculpt of the triceps are exaggerated to just the right degree without feeling comical. The sculpt work on the ripped pants and belt is incredible. You can tell the artists took their time to sculpt each tear in the fabric with care, giving us a great flow of movement while also keeping articulation in mind. The overall sculpt work looks great from any angle, and makes it easy to film and photograph this figure while keeping a pleasing aesthetic. The hair is a very saturated yellow with some orange shading. It's a bold and colorful look which I do enjoy, however this is inaccurate to the color of the anime which, in comparison, is way more pale and closer to white. Having seen some custom made heads and repaints, I believe they could definitely have made the coloring more anime accurate, and I personally prefer that pale yellow color for the first appearance of Super Saiyan. There are also issues with the chest color on this one not matching the rest of the upper body. This is a first release and it was fixed on the reissue, but I believe figures should be judged as they are, and fixing things in a reissue feels scummy when your most loyal customers will have probably bought the first edition. I really appreciate the paintwork and shading on the pants and hair, but I believe it would look so much better with paint on the skin to indicate shading as well. Just look at how much better this Broly figure looks with all that paint in the muscle grooves. Overall, this figure gets a score of 9 out of 10 for the look. I absolutely adore the proportions and sculpt, and though I personally don't mind the chest discoloration as it doesn't seem to show up much in my lighting, the figure still has some room for improvement as some shading on the skin could have really elevated it, and the hair could be more anime accurate. Versatility. This section is essentially about the accessories that come with the figure, but focusing solely on how those extra parts allow for versatility with posing and animation. With 4 beautiful interchangeable faceplates, we can achieve a variety of angry and serious expressions. These are sculpted and painted wonderfully, and I particularly love the screaming and growling faces for their sharpness and exaggerated eye shapes. A lack of happy faces is not an issue for this specific depiction, given the context of the scene it's adapted from. It also comes with alternate flowing bangs that can replace the standard hairpieces bangs. It looks nice and dynamic and is very useful for scenes where Goku is moving quickly, but it does somewhat look as though Goku is staring at his own hair with some of these faceplates. We also have an entire optional headpiece depicting all of his bangs blown back. This makes a wonderful Kamehameha headpiece paired with that nice exaggerated screaming face. However, since they're offering an entirely different headpiece depicting hair being blown away, I would have liked it if they really went for it and sculpted the hair more deformed and windswept backwards, or even instead offered a more calm, fluffy windswept hairpiece depicting this scene, paired with an eyes looking down face. As it is now, the rest of the hair aside from the bangs is almost identical to the main one, and having all the hair blown back makes this kind of an unappealing look in all but the most extreme poses. If you have this figure, I'm sure you've put this head on only for the Kamehameha pose, then quickly switch back to the main one for everything else. I do think I could find a few situations to use this unique headpiece in stop motion, but nothing that I couldn't just do with the alternate bangs on the standard hairpiece. Speaking of, the Kamehameha effect piece that comes with the figure is pretty well done. It is a reuse of the one from the Super Saiyan 4 GT figure and has a peg hold that corresponds to the handpieces that have a peg on them. This holds the effect part quite solidly and makes it suitable for animation, unlike the old Kamehameha effect that was held by just balancing it between the fingers. It comes with 6 pairs of hands, a very good amount. They seem to have gone the extra mile here with fist hands, widespread hands, Kamehameha hands with pegs, the same Kamehameha hands without pegs, martial arts hands, and even a slightly looser gripped pair of martial arts hands. That last one is where I think they went the extra mile, and it can make for an in-between frame if you wanted to animate a scene where his hands go from those Kamehameha hands to the martial arts hands. For me though, it's arguable whether this in-between hand pose was even necessary. Even for animation purposes, I don't believe this is worth the inclusion, and we could have easily done without it. For versatility, this figure gets a 9.5 out of 10. Coming with almost too many optional hands and headpieces and the nice effect part. The only thing I could ask for would be a display stand, but I don't tend to use those for animation anyways. Movement. For animation, not only does a figure need to be well articulated to move between a wide range of poses, but the joints need to have just the right tolerance and tightness in order to hold its pose, while also being easy to manipulate. It's a tough balance to strike, but overall this figure does it really well. In terms of range, this figure has some great articulation all around. Some notable points are the shoulders, which are massive and so may seem challenging to engineer, but using the entire circumference of the shoulder as a swivel, we get all the range we can ask for without sacrificing any of the bulk. The head is on a double ball peg, which allows free movement in any direction with impressive range. However, when it comes to the practical movement, there is something somewhat disappointing. The head looks up quite far and is only restricted by the sculpt of the hair. However, when tilting the head down as far as it goes, the face and bangs very easily disconnect from the head, leaving an ugly gap. You might even run into the problem of the face piece completely popping off. You shouldn't have to worry about pieces falling off when simply posing the head of your figure. This is unfortunately a very common issue with quite a few SH Figuarts, and it presents a significant problem when the goal is to move your figure and maximize its range. The arms bend a decent bit beyond 90 degrees, which is great considering the bulk of the arm, and the hands are on swivel pegs. These are tight, leaving no fear of the hands falling off. However, it does make it a little difficult to switch out during delicate animation scenes, often requiring me to simply grab the whole figure away from its pose to yank out the hands, which obviously could be a problem for stop motion scenes where I don't want to be breaking the pose every time I need to change them out. The shoulders connect to a butterfly joint, which allow the arms to come forward and slightly across the chest. It works smoothly and allows subtle posing and adjustments for animation. The torso doesn't have the best range. I would have liked more articulation here even at the cost of gapping. As it is, the torso and waist ball joint allow a very modest crunch forward and a slightly better bend backwards. This could definitely have been better for a character that's always performing martial arts, and though angles can compensate, to me a deep ab crunch can elevate a figure's dynamic posability by a significant amount. The hips and thighs have a very impressive range of movement thanks in part to the soft crotch piece, though it is limited in backwards movement due to the solid butt piece. In my opinion, they could skip the butt piece or shrink it in favor of more range. The thigh swivel works well, and the knees bend a decent amount past 90. The ankles barely allow for the feet to bend upwards at all, though the range in other directions is decent once you tuck in the obstructing parts of the feet. The ankle rocker is very good, and I love how deep it can twist inwards. That's extremely useful for dynamic posing and balance. Now that we've run through the range of articulation, let's talk about how it all works in practice. The upper body presents little to no issues aside from the faceplate disconnecting, and all the joints here have great tolerance. They're tight enough to hold a pose, but not too much that changing the pose is difficult. It's a delicate balance to strike, and I believe they've nailed it for the most part. One small gripe here is that the elbow joints may be a tiny bit too tight, forcing me to brace the arm at the bicep when I want to get a subtle bend in the elbow without moving the entire arm or accidentally activating the bicep swivel. All in all though, I prefer my joints to be slightly tighter than for them to have any looseness at all, so I won't complain about that too much. Speaking of looseness, I find that the legs on this figure are actually a little too loose for my liking. They move extremely smoothly and are a joy to pose for still shots, but the looseness is definitely an issue when it comes to stability. The hip joints where the leg connects to the crotch are a little bit looser than I'd like, but my main concern are the knee joints, which have a looseness that unfortunately affects the stability of the figure in some poses. I wouldn't call them loose or floppy at all though, it's just a small nitpick I have after having animated with him a lot. For movement, the figure gets a rating of 8.5 out of 10. It has some room for improvement with the faceplate popping off, the torso crunch being quite limited, and the legs being just a bit on the loose side. Otherwise, this figure poses like a dream and I very much enjoy the smoothness of it, with almost nothing getting in the way of movement when animating. Durability. When using action figures for stop motion, it's important to understand that they aren't necessarily made for stop motion, and companies will more likely have shelf posing and photography in mind when making these figures. All this to say that when a figure is used for animation, it ends up being posed and used quite heavily compared to the average collector. Personally, I tend to push my figures as far as they can go when it comes to the range of motion, which can get rough on the joints and really puts their construction quality to the test. I've broken some lower quality figures before while doing animation, so it's important to any stop motion animator that a figure is able to withstand some heavy play and constant repetitive motion. I've had this figure pretty much since its release, close to 2 years now, and it's been one of my favorite figures to pose and animate with. As for durability, it has definitely stood the test of time. It looks just as nice as when I first got it, and the joints feel the same as I remember them being out the box. I don't see much if any paint rubbing, partly due to the sparse amount of paint on it in the first place, and despite suffering some shelf dives and plenty of posing for animation, it retains its sharp sculpt and smooth movement. For durability, this figure gets a score of 9.5 out of 10. That doesn't mean it's indestructible, but for the purpose of animation, it has yet to show any signs of loosening up or breakage after 2 years and very heavy play. In conclusion, as a fan of more muscular depictions of Dragon Ball characters, this depiction of Super Saiyan Goku is close to perfection for me. It comes with plenty of accessories and I cannot state enough how smooth it feels to pose. It's a wonderful figure for stop motion and will continue to be one of my favorite figures to animate with. There are some things I would have liked to be done differently, but that's from a pretty niche perspective of stop motion animation and my own personal preferences. At the end of the day, despite its flaws, I picked this figure to review because of how much I've animated it, which I wouldn't have done if it wasn't so wonderful to work with. If this comes up for another re-release, or if you can track it down for close to retail price, I highly recommend this to anyone who's a fan of Dragon Ball and is looking for a figure to animate. The answer to our ultimate question, does it animate? Yes it does. Final score, 9 out of 10.